Welcome back to the Property Management Show. I'm your host, Marie Tepman from Fourandhalf Marketing Agency. Fourandhalf is your partner in getting more owner leads via marketing. We help with websites, SEO, online reputation, pay-per-click ads, social media, lead magnets, video and blog content, pretty much anything you need to get more owner leads. Visit fourandhalf.com to get started on growth today. That's fourandhalf.com. Here in part 2 of our conversation with Todd Ortscheid, we will go over real-world churn rates for property managers, how boosting customer lifetime value can elevate your property management company and give you the budget necessary to market your business properly. And finally, we'll go over the regulatory issues that could cap your fee maxing ability if you're not proactive. So without further ado, let's dig in. You were talking about churn a little bit earlier. We also get a lot of property managers who think like, oh, I'll just need help with like reputation, right? And then I'm not looking to grow. So I just need the reputation just for show, but then I don't need to grow. So I don't need any other marketing. But I know that from everyone has like an industry report now. And I think everyone can agree that property managers should expect to lose a certain number of doors every month, every year, even if you don't do anything, even if you do a perfect job. People die, people want to sell their property, people change their minds. And so from your work with, consulting clients, what is like a realistic annual or maybe monthly churn rate? And then how do you translate that lost kind of like customer lifetime value to kind of like a healthy percent of like, what percent of your customer lifetime value is it healthy to spend on like retention activities or acquisition activities to replenish churn?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things where everybody underestimates what the number is. If you ask a property manager, what's your churn, and they're just thinking about it off the top of their head, they usually give you a number like, oh, we don't have much, 5% maybe, something like that. But then if you actually drill down into their numbers and look at it, you usually find it's 20%, 25%, something like that. And, what's factoring into that is a lot of times a property manager will say, oh, well, I sold the property for the owner, so I don't count that as churn. Well, that's still churn. You're getting the revenue on another, it's coming in under sales revenue. That's great. I'm glad you got that. You captured that sale. But at the same time, you still churned a managed door. So, all of this stuff
lost recurring revenue.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So, I mean, you're getting a one-time cash infusion, but then it's gone. It's not coming back. So, and usually if you're fee maxing, like we were talking about, then a lot of times that one-time commission is only like a year's revenue in a lot of cases. So, then it's at a loss from then on. So a lot of people underestimate what their churn is. And then a lot of people don't factor in things that should be churn. So the average industry churn is 20%. And we get that from the NARPM benchmarking report that was put out about 2 years ago. Kind of the goal, which is what I always, the benchmark that we tell everybody, this is what you should be shooting for, is right around 10%. If you can get your number down to there, you're doing really, really well. You're basically in the top tier, the top 25% of all property managers if you can keep your number down there. So it's surprisingly difficult, especially, the last, obviously not right now because interest rates have spiked so much, but the prior couple of years, sales were intense. People were selling a lot of properties and a lot of those churn rates jumped. So it's not easy to keep it down there, but that's really what everybody should be shooting for, is 10% or less.
And do you find that, speaking of churn, right? So we're talking about owner churn just now. Let's talk about tenant churn, right? Like fee maxing is basically increasing the customer lifetime value by taking more money from the residents so that both the property manager and the owner have better returns. That's what it is in its essence, right?
That's true.
Doesn't that cause residents to churn and therefore increase vacancy rates?
It's a good question. I mean, and there's a few different things to factor in there. I mean, the first thing I would say is a lot of that ancillary revenue is behavioral based. So it's not that every single tenant is having to pay these extra fees. A lot of it is based on how they behave. So, for example, late fees are the classic example of a behavioral fee. You don't have to pay it unless you pay your rent late. And there's a million different things like that. Bounce check fees, pet fees. If you want a pet, we're happy to have it, but you got to pay for it. Is your credit below what our normal allowance is for credit? And then we'll charge you an extra fee if you want to rent from us. There's lots of things like this that are optional that everybody's not paying. And in a lot of these cases, people are actually very happy that they're paying it to you. So the pet fees are the perfect example of this. If you will allow pets and other people don't, so, I've got a client up in Northern Washington who he is the only property manager in his market that basically allows pets everywhere. So when you search in that area of Northern Washington State, what you'll find is there's like 4 properties listed for rent where pets are allowed. And meanwhile, his management company is all the others. Everything else, if you want to rent, it's all him. So he's basically able to rent properties quicker, bring on more owners because they're happy to get their properties rented quicker, and he makes more money off of it because it's a pet fee. So, when you're willing to do these things, a lot of times people will actually be thankful to you because they'll say, the other landlord won't rent to me. You will. You'll let me rent with my dog that means everything to me. So I am more than happy to pay you X dollars a month for the privilege of being able to have this dog. And then they're not going to churn out because if they leave, it's very difficult for them to find someone else to rent to them that'll treat them in the way you will and allow them to have their dog. So, the same thing is true when we talk about things like credit contingency fees based on their lower credit score. A lot of times the resident is just thankful that there's someone willing to work with them. So when you're doing those things, they're not going to churn because they're very happy that they're working with you on that kind of stuff. And then on other things, it's like the triple win. So, Second Nature, I'm sure everybody's heard of Second Nature at this point. They've got their motto, the triple win, which is the owner wins, the tenant wins, the property manager wins. And those are things like, renter's insurance, where you're getting the tenant a better deal on their insurance than they could get on their own. So yeah, you're making a little bit of money off the resident benefits package, but the tenant is still better off. So, wherever they rent, they're going to have to get renter's insurance. They're going to have to replace furnace filters. There's lots of stuff they have to do. You can provide that to them for cheaper and still make money because you're doing it in bulk. And then you can also provide them other benefits like we'll boost your credit score by reporting your payment history to the credit bureaus. So the tenant's getting benefits from you that they don't get from anybody else. And that kind of locks them in. They're like, okay, yeah, I could leave and go somewhere else and only pay the rent if I rent from just a regular one, do-it-yourself landlord. But then I'm going to have to pay my own insurance. I'm going to have to go out and buy my own filters. I'm not going to get the benefits to my credit. I can't have my dog. So, when you look at all of this put together, the tenant is better off. The owner's better off because they're not having to pay a bigger management fee. More of the revenue's coming from the tenant. And obviously you're doing better. So everybody's winning. There's really no one who loses on this. And I think that's what a lot of the regulators kind of miss on this is when you have a place like a California, for example, where there's a lot of restrictions on what you're able to do, then a lot of times you're just kind of screwing over these tenants who would like to be able to have these opportunities and they can't get them because the regulators have come in and said no.
Yeah, you already touched on kind of like the next section, which is back when fee maxing was an infant, kind of like an infant idea, it was like the wild, wild west. And then, as it is, regulators hear about it and they want to get involved and they think they know how to control it and they kind of ruin it for everyone the same way they misuse rent control. And so can you give our audience, an idea of what are the legislative, hurdles that are now relevant to property managers in specific areas of the country?
Yeah, definitely. This is obviously a big topic because it's not just property management and the rental industry. Regulators have targeted Ticketmaster and Airbnb. So they've gone after them and VRBO. They've kind of targeted a lot of these different companies and they've used the term junk fees and they've kind of lumped everything in under that. And I hate that term, but that's the term that's being thrown around by a lot of people. And
it's
what
marketing to get votes.
That's
Just like
exactly
death
right.
tax, right? Like that's like a classic example.
Exactly.
Like when they call it death tax, people were like against it, but before it was called death tax, people were like, oh, that makes sense. So now it's like if they would have used ancillary fees, people were like, I don't know what that means, but then they're like junk fees. Like I don't like junk.
That's right. It's all spin. And that's what
Mhm.
politics comes down to. And you're a marketer, you understand
I
that very
know.
well. So, I mean, we've got to do a better job at this. I will say that, we have to do a better job as an industry, and all industries do. I mean, I think the airline industry has done a pretty good job on convincing lawmakers to kind of leave them alone and let them make their money. Because if they don't, they've kind of explained to legislators and regulators, hey, look, if I don't get the money from these ancillary fees, then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to increase my fares. And when I do that, then nobody at the lower end of the income spectrum is going to be able to afford to buy an airline ticket. So right now they can buy the basic economy ticket and be happy. But if you tell me I'm not allowed to do that anymore and I can't charge these ancillary fees, all the fares are going to go up and everybody suffers. And, we need to do a better job at bringing that same message to regulators, because that is the reality. Ultimately, the industry has advanced. We're at the point we need to be able to fund things like technology. We need to be able to provide these things that we didn't provide 10 years ago, because like you said, that's all table stakes at this point. So if we can't provide that stuff through ancillary fees, we're going to do it through what? Rent increases and property management fee increases. And when we raise the property management fee, what does the owner demand? You're going to have to raise the rent so I can pay that management fee and not hurt my margins. So
Mhm.
who suffers then? Every resident suffers in that point, not just the tenant who wants the tenant, or excuse me, who wants the pet, or who has the lower credit, or who pays their rent late. Everybody suffers in that point. So it's not just situational. So, that's what this really comes down to, and we need to do a better job of sending that message. But I also think there are just some legislators and some regulators who just have it out for landlords, and that's always going to be the case. We can't avoid some of that, but I think we do need to do more on this to get our message out there.
Yeah, kind of like a Robin Hood mentality.
Yeah.
Steal from the rich, give to the poor. It's like, yeah, can you think about that for a sec? Like,
Well, not only that, but I mean, there's a perception that the average landlord is the rich, and
yeah.
you and I know that because so many people think and we had this recently just come up in the state of Georgia, where there was this really big pushback against all of the institutional money that was in rental homes in Atlanta, because we're one of the biggest markets here, where BlackRock and all these companies have come in and bought as corporations all these properties. So there's this perception among
Mhm.
the media, lawmakers, regulators, that rental properties are all owned by big, rich, billionaire fat cats. And the reality is they are 1% of the rental owner market. 1%. That's it. When we look nationwide, everything else is owned by small investors. And people don't understand that. The average landlord is a blue collar person who almost all of their wealth is in this rental property. This is all they've got. And people just don't know that. So, I mean, that's another thing that we really need to let people know.
Yeah, and so you mentioned that, George is kind of like being targeted because of this perception. What are other pockets of the country that are becoming like more hostile places for fee maxing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the West Coast is where we see most of it. I mean, we do see New York has been very hostile to it. That's probably not a surprise to most. That's kind of what people would expect. Connecticut, there are some places on the East Coast, but most of what we see is California, Washington, Oregon. And those are where we always have these problems. But I'll say where we've kind of been surprised the last few years, Colorado has been a big hotbed for
Interesting.
yeah, for anti-landlord legislation. They've got an attorney general who is running for governor, who is very, very much anti-property manager. So it's been very difficult there. I've got several clients in that state who have really had to modify how they do things to comply. Another state that's really shifted to being a lot less landlord friendly is Nevada. Over the last few years, there's been a lot of people who have migrated from California into Nevada, and it's changed the environment there. So all those people who have moved there, they've voted more how they did in California, and that's gotten some more of those legislators into office. And they want that in a lot of cases, but then they don't realize that a lot of cases, these lawmakers are going to also pass these anti-landlord regulations at the same time. So that's what's been starting to happen there. So that's still kind of West Coast, but it's starting to push its way in a little bit. So
Yeah.
that's what we're starting to see.
Oh boy. And so, you mentioned you have consulting clients in some of these more hostile areas. What do you recommend your clients do when faced with such hurdles? And like they still need to make money, the government says you can't. And so are they just stuck with like a 5% margin?
No, I mean you can certainly do better than that, but it is more difficult. So, I always tell people, like when I'm in a market like Oregon or Colorado, I always say, look, we're not going to be able to get you to be like one of those $500 a month revenue per unit PMs. That's not going to be possible. So we have to moderate our expectations a little. Maybe we can get you to 250 or 300, maybe. But we're going to have to be a little creative with it. So, a lot of times what we'll do, for example, in a place like Oregon, for example, you can't charge a resident benefits package fee. You can't make it mandatory, I should say. So instead, we have to find workarounds. So we'll do things like we'll include it in the price of the rent. So we'll say, okay, we've got a benefits package. The normal rent would be $2,000. So we'll just advertise it at $2,050 or whatever your benefits package is. So it's included in the rent, but then over on the management agreement side, we say, okay, the first $50 in this case of rent that's collected goes to the management company to cover the management fee. So you kind of find these ways to make it work if you can. And you can't do that with everything. There's a lot of stuff that you can't get away, with finding a way around it. And then you're not going to get that revenue. So, I mean, like, for example, with Colorado is now capped what you can charge on a pet fee. I think it's $35 if I remember right. So you have no choice. That's all you can do. You charge it at that, and then you try to make it work. And I think what's going to happen is over time, just like happened with rent control back in the 70s when we first tried that, we're going to realize that this is actually negatively impacting residents, and there's going to be a backlash to it eventually. But it's going to take a while for that to happen. So in the meantime, we just have to do the best we can, find the workarounds we can. And where we can't find those workarounds, we're going to have to keep our expenses lower, and we're not going to be able to offer the same level of service that someone in Florida, for example, would be able to offer.
Yeah, it's really sad because, rent control was kind of experimental in the 70s, and it's been very clear that it doesn't work. And it still is being used by regulators blindly to this day. And so I hope it doesn't happen to fee maxing that, like it takes that long for people to realize, yet people still don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really crazy when you look at the history of that. Because I mean, we're supposed to learn from history. That's kind of the whole point of this. And we literally tried this. It's within the lifetime of a lot of the people who are regulating this, where they should remember this. But I mean, we've literally codified some of these lessons we learned. Because if you look in some states after the 70s, when we learned how this went so badly, we literally put laws in place. Some states actually put constitutional amendments that say you cannot have rent control in municipalities that the state doesn't pass it. We're literally blanket preempting it. No rent control in the state. This was done in states like Minnesota, Florida, some places that have actually implemented rent control since then. And they've had to overturn these laws that were put in place specifically because they backfired. And, I studied economics in college. So, I mean, that's where I focus. And there is almost nothing that you can find 100% unanimity when it comes to economists on what they agree. But you can pretty much find 100% agreement amongst all economists that rent control does not work and has major, major negative repercussions. And lawmakers still put it in place despite that. So, it's crazy what happens out there.
Could you say the same thing for like ancillary fees, fee maxing?
That's more recent. So, I mean, we haven't really done this as much in the past. I mean, that's one of the things where it's kind of a new thing that's happened over the past couple of decades, really. I mean, even if you go back, I guess if you go back to the 90s, you'll see Ticketmaster starting to experiment with it and the airlines doing it a little bit. But for the most part, this has been a new millennium type thing where everybody has been doing this. And the reason, by the way, that it works is because people like the unbundling. If you actually do polling data on this, there's been lots of research on it where people say, yeah, I know that I'm basically paying the same thing if I buy the airline ticket on Spirit and have all the ancillary fees as opposed to buying a flat rate, normal ticket on Delta or United, but I like that I'm in control of what I'm paying for. So if I get the food, that's my choice and I pay for it then. If I get the internet, that's my choice and I pay for it. And they're fine with that. They actually prefer that as consumers. And, regulators don't quite understand that. And I can kind of understand because, there are some egregious examples of this. I'm not going to defend what Ticketmaster does. There's the fee, and, it's just one fee after another that you can't really defend. And there's no value add to it. I get why people want to call those things junk fees. I still don't like the term because companies have to make money somehow, but it's really tough to defend some of that stuff. But that's not really what we do in this industry. Pretty much everything we're charging for, there's either an extra service you're getting for it, or it's because of something that you did. You made a decision that you were going to not pay your rent or whatever the case may be. So it's within your control. And, I think we really need to kind of separate out those truly junk fees that there's nothing tied to it from the ones that are tied to an additional product or service or an individual's behavior.
Yeah. I think there's a really big distinction between why are you putting the fee in place? If you're just putting the fee in place purely as a money grab, don't do that. That's bad. That's basically what Ticketmaster tried to do. And so if you're putting a fee in place to change behavior, right? Like you mentioned, that's one thing, or to provide something of value. I think using that as your North Star will not leave you astray, right? Because you can get into, it's easy to get into the weeds of what is a fair thing to charge for versus what should just be expected of property management. And I feel like it depends on what each company's situation is, right? How they're set up, right? There's no hard and fast rule, everyone must charge this way and deliver it that way.
Yeah, I think, and a lot of this is business model dependent. When you look at it, you can have a property management company that has the idea that, okay, we're going to have a pricing plan where everything's all inclusive. And, that's on the owner side, at least, there's no additional fees. We just charge one fee and everything's included in that. Or you can do, like what my company does, we do 3-tiered pricing. So you can get the platinum plan where a bunch of this stuff is included in the management fee. Or if you prefer, buying a basic economy ticket, you can get just the bare bones, pay the lowest management fee, and then the other stuff is extra if you need it. There's nothing wrong with any of these models. The thing I always tell everybody, ultimately what you need to do is figure out a model that's going to get you to the revenue that allows you to provide the kind of product that you want to provide and still have a decent margin for yourself. That's really what this comes down to. The margin needs to be worth your while because it's not, I'll be just straight up honest with you. If your business only produces a 5% profit margin, sell your business and put your money into bonds instead, because you might as well not be wasting 8 hours a day on doing something that only produces a 5% return. You're spinning your wheels. So, you need to make a decent margin to make it worth your while. But you also need to be able to provide the kind of product and service you want to provide. So figure out what that number is and find a revenue model that works for it. Maybe that's an all-inclusive model for the kind of business you want to run, or maybe it's a model that's based on ancillary fees, but don't sell yourself short. If you're in a market where you can't do an all-inclusive model where the customer base just isn't there for that, then don't pigeonhole yourself into that. Allow yourself to charge ancillary fees. Feel comfortable with that because you need to run a business that provides the service that you can be proud of and that you can make a decent margin on.
All right. Let's pin that thought for a little bit and we'll continue the discussion in part 3. Do you need help turning that extra margin into owner leads who are actually a good fit for your business? Well, Fourandhalf has been doing that for property managers since 2012. If you want this for your business, go to fourandhalf.com to get started today. That's fourandhalf.com. In our next episode, Todd and I will pivot from policy to practice. We'll talk about education-first marketing, how to create video that converts, and how to use AI to be an efficiency assistant rather than a brand killer. Make sure you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, our newsletter, or our podcast feed to not miss out. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.